Hi, hello. Thank you for joining me in this webinar. For those connected today that don't know me, I'm Stefano Bernardi. As you can tell by the name, I'm Italian, and I'm an expert in InDesign. I do trainings about it, and probably around the web you might have found some of the tutorials that I generally write. Um, the first time I thought about this webinar was several months ago, but I'm doing it only now because I had to wrap my head about the issue and trying to find a way to give you the proper tools that you need to understand how to deal with this workflow in a better way, uh, and fit all that information in less than 1 hour. So uh, the result is that uh, I it barely can fit in 1 hour. So for the reason I won't be able to reply to your questions today. Um, if you have questions, if you have feedback, you can write them uh, in the question section of the software that we're using today, or you can also send me an email after the webinar with your questions or your feedback about what we've seen today. Um, some of you mentioned in when they subscribed that they wanted to today they wanted to learn more about Redocon. However, today we won't see anything about Redocon. I might mention it, during the webinar because we have also some clients connected today, and I love them to understand how the things that they are learning today will impact in the user experience that they have with our software. Uh, but it won't be, it won't be uh, a demo of the software. We will talk about InDesign. We will focus on the impact that your choices have in InDesign, in your layout, and in the workflow. And we will see also how translators work. Today, we'll see how to create a translation-friendly InDesign document. We will talk about the mistakes that everybody does. Probably some of you also do when working in a project in InDesign that will be translated in several languages. And we will see that there are many issues that you might encounter yourself, or other issues that other people involved in your project have when working with your documents. All of this will help you to build a lean workflow, and that is important because it will help you to be quicker and to avoid mistakes. My focus will be especially on the designer today, because everything starts from the way you create your documents. And that makes a huge difference in the entire process. As I said, we will see many things, but you don't need to, write down what we see, take notes. We will be sending all the slides after the webinar. Again, if you have any questions or feedback, you can share them with me through an email, maybe. And well, after this webinar, you'll have a clear picture of the entire process of creating multilingual documents within InDesign. And that will make it easier for you to prevent mistakes, avoid manual tasks. These two things are quite connected, and also be faster with the production of your documents. So yeah, what is my background and why am I so passionate about these sort of problems? I've been working with any kind of company and a lot of multinational companies for the last 10 years now, helping them creating a lean workflow of production of these documents. And I focus precisely into creating the language versions of these documents in InDesign. I was a consultant, so of course my target has always been to produce these documents faster and to deal with any kind of issue or updates very quickly. So I could work on more projects and have more clients. At the same time, I wanted my clients to save money in these projects so that they would have been happier about my job, and they would eventually come back with other projects. So yeah, I know the process very well. I've been working with InDesign for quite some time now, and I'm also one of the founders of Redacon, which is the software that we developed. And yeah, our goal with Redacon is to make it really easy for you to work on multilingual documents in InDesign with in-house translators or with your translation vendors. So what's the deal today? What is the promise? Why should you keep listening to me? So I can promise that you're going to save X percent to your company over the next year or anything like that, because it really depends on your workflow, it depends on your documents, and it depends on many other factors. But with this webinar, you're going to understand more about the process, and that will allow you to work stress-free and see what can be improved in your documents. And after this webinar, you'll produce documents that have no mistakes. You will be able to deal with issues, or you won't have any issue, and you'll have less manual tasks, and you'll produce better documents. So this is what you take today from this webinar. Today, we need to focus for a bit on the base concepts of translation, because it will help you understand the whole picture. And then I share with you the tips and the best practices on how to build a document that will be produced in many languages. Specifically, we will see how to choose the right layout, how to deal with textual content, and how to deal with the images. Well, you probably know what is the challenge here. Designers generally don't know how a translator works, and they don't know what are the mistakes they're responsible of. While on the other side, translators generally don't know how to use InDesign. And even if they do know how to use it, you would prefer, and they also prefer not to touch your design, because it might create some issues, or you might want it to be to look in a different way. So it's in your interest as a designer or a team manager or a marketer to provide them with a translation-friendly InDesign document. And if the document is optimized for being translated, you'll see that you'll have to work less after the translation. Your team will spend less on translation, and the overall process will take less time. So now this first part of the webinar, it's very, very helpful if you already work with a translation vendor and you're looking of some ways to improve the collaboration with them. It's also really helpful if you're looking to speed up the production of your documents, or if you're using Redacon. I warn you though that this part it's going to be quite technical, but you need it as a foundation to then understand why InDesign should be used in a specific way. We will talk about InDesign in 10 minutes, I guess, but this part, let's see this part because it's very important, and then we move to more practical things. So now for a designer, we can simplify the process of translating a document as of replacing a textual content with other text. And while doing this, you want this new version of your document to retain the same look and, of course, to communicate the right things. Um, until now, either you copy pasted the new text into your layout, and if you did this, I would suggest you to stop doing it because it makes it very easy to introduce mistakes inside your document. Or you probably outsourced completely the creation of your documents to a vendor. Um, so these vendors, of course, use some tools to help themselves with this process. Uh, what these tools do is they read your text, any kind of text, and they create different chunks that allows the translator to make the translation work more efficient and faster. So we call this process segmentation, and the chunks are called segments. By the way, also Redocon does that. You probably have already seen if you're using the software. Um, this is an automated process. It's done by algorithms that break the text into segments following some rules. And as you can imagine, being this process automated, a lot of the mistakes depends on how you work in InDesign and how your document is created. Because when you don't follow the best practices, you're probably messing up with those algorithms. By translating these segments, your translators create translation memory, which is a database that stores the source text and the translation in what is called translation pairs or translation units. These translation units are then used to help the translator with future translations. The advantages of having a translation memory and using it are making the translation job faster, lower the costs, but it also improve the quality of your translation because it helps you to reuse translations, and so by doing that you also start using the same terminology all over your documents, and you improve the communication of all the documents that you have. So if your documents are built correctly, they'll be segmented properly, and you create good translation memories. Um, Good translation memories. Well, remember that a lot depends on the InDesign file. We will see it later, and we will see later what you have to do. But right now, I wanted to highlight once again that a very little effort on the InDesign document can save you a lot of time at a later stage, and also it helps the entire team to avoid to avoid issues and mistakes. And you know that this is not it's not anything complex or crazy to do. You only need to understand what's the impact of your choices and how to do specific things, and what will happen during the translation, and you know, and that's it. You already have achieved a real great a great a great result in the way you produce your documents. So again, good segmentation. We already seen before what it does. But segmentation, we highlighted again. Once again, it creates issues for the translators, and we will see later better when we talk about text. And also it adds more work. Here I wrote it adds more work for the translator, but it also adds more work to the designer and the entire team. Sorry. Also, bad segmentation doesn't allow you to reuse segments that you segments from your previous translations. So you won't be able to use the same terminology, and the consistency of translation among your documents will drop. So finally, we talk about InDesign and about your workflow. So where is it that your process is broken, and how do you fix it? From now on, we're going to look at the impact that your layout has, how to deal with text, how to deal with images, and if you're looking to automate part of this process, we will also see what tools you should avoid because they make the process harder, and they might introduce dangerous mistakes. So your document layout has a big impact in the way you produce your documents because some layouts cannot be automated at all, and so they require a lot of manual work, and that might increase the risk of you making mistakes. So I summarized the different layout in three groups. You see them here, and we're gonna start by looking at the single language layout. And in this layout, you have a document that is produced in one language, and then it's translated into another language. So in a page, there should always be one single language at a time. This is the safest and also the cheapest way to go when you create your documents because once you created the base language correctly, it's the easiest layout to translate. And also it makes it easier at a later stage to apply changes or updates to the document. Then we have mixed language layouts. I'm generally against them because the user experience is extremely bad with this type of documents for the reader. Reading a document that contains two or more languages is not immediate, and people are generally already lazy when they read something. So why would you make your content harder to read for them? Someone might think that there is an economical advantage into creating a mixed language document because you have only one document to work on and you print only one single version of the document. But actually, if you do the math of the entire project, it's more expensive to create such a sort of document in many languages because it's less effective, the workflow that you use to create them. You and your team will probably struggle with creating each language version of these documents, and every update will take more time because you'll always need to wait for the translation to be ready, and then you or someone else will have to copy and paste the translation inside your document, and these manual tasks also they escalate when you have someone else that is doing the job with you or for you. So, for example, if you have a colleague that is going to work in that document and I don't know, copy paste the translation inside the document, you'll have then to create some sort of a guide for him to understand where you want the new content to be placed. Also, sometimes you have to create that guide for yourself, because otherwise you don't know where to paste the translation. And the thing with these mixed language documents is that they cannot, they cannot be, they are very hard to automate. Another thing with this type of layout is that updates becomes a nightmare, because you find yourself working uh, with many languages and keep track of many languages, and you'll have to edit all of them. And so what will happen is that you'll probably have to open the document many times. And if someone is working with you in the same document, it might be that they open the document and go and edit a part that was already checked. And you always have to wait for the translations to be ready before completing a document. So again, as we said, in this type of layout, a lot of challenges to the workflow and to the production of your documents. Of course, the way you handle your text and images also changes your translation experience completely. If you deal with the text and again the images correctly, you'll have a document completely translated, checked, and ready to be published in hours instead of days. So we're going now to see how to deal with the text inside InDesign and what things impact the segmentation. Might sound like it's a lot to take, but actually once you've started using these little tips, you'll ask yourself how you've done that before. The first thing you should do is to activate hidden characters in your document. In order to create a translation-friendly document, we need to increase our understanding of the structure of the document. So to activate hidden characters, you click on Type and then Show Hidden Characters. And what this will do is InDesign will show you ends of paragraph, tabulations and spaces and control characters in general. So with this, you'd be able to understand where there might be segmentation issues inside your document. So here is an example of what happens when we use the end of a paragraph in the wrong way. Because of the hard return, this sentence will be divided into two segments during the translation process. And the first issue you might notice is that these two segments, especially instruction 4, might never be used again to translate anything. But this is actually not the most important thing here. The hard return might also influence the translation of your sentence and so the future translations of other sentences. If we translate this text into Italian, for example, as two separate segments, the translation would be something like this. And to a native speaker like myself, the translation sounds quite weird. I would translate it differently. The perfect translation would be this one that you see here. And as you can tell, it's pretty different because the other one didn't have any article. This one has the articles. Yeah, maybe it's hard for those of you that don't speak Italian. But the question here is what happens then to future translations when we've translated these two sentences in this way? What happens if, for example, we use use and maintenance as a title somewhere in another document? Well, if for any chance your translator or you will reuse the same translation from before, this is what will happen. Your translation will be completely wrong. And that will happen only because you made a mistake in your first document. You placed a hard return that created an issue with the segmentation of your document. So activating the hidden characters will help you avoid all those issues that you see in this slide. Mind that the correct way to wrap a sentence in InDesign is to use the software turn, which you can place by pressing the function key and enter. That will create a single segment. You see it also if you try to apply a paragraph style to a sentence with a software turn, you'll see that InDesign sees the sentence as an entire sentence. So a fundamental rule that you can make yours from here is to use hard right turn at the end of a full sentence or paragraph, and the software turn to wrap text within a sentence. If you pay attention on how you use hard turns and tabulation, and in general how you type the text inside InDesign, you'll avoid issues with the segmentation. And that will save you from mistakes and will help you to retain the document's layout and will lower the number of manual edits that you have to do when producing documents in other languages. Another issue an InDesign user faces with text is when a translated language is longer or shorter than the original text. For example, if you work already on some documents that had to be produced in other languages, you probably noticed that German is generally 30% longer than English, Italian is 10-15 longer than 15% longer, French is longer, while, for example, languages such as Chinese are generally way shorter. If your layout is not ready to host this new text, you'll be forced to adapt it manually for every language you're going to produce your document into. Even with an automated workflow, a lot of the edits a designer would do in a multilingual project is adapting the layout to the length of the new text. And this is something that you can actually avoid, or at least you can drastically reduce. For example, you can create a layout. You can avoid it by creating a layout that is ready to host longer or a shorter language. And how you do it is pretty simple. So this is a threaded text. It means that the text in the left box flows directly into the box on the right. And if we add some text at the beginning of the text, the pink text that you see at the bottom will be moved completely to the box on the right. You have probably already used this threaded text. And I guess you've already seen this thing too. The plus in this text box tells you that there is some hidden text that InDesign is not able to display on that page. This happens a lot when producing documents in many languages because, again, some languages require more space to say the same thing. And to really make your workflow faster and more precise, we need to find a way to prevent that overset to happen. We need to make sure that if you replace any language in a given box, that box will display the text completely and correctly. We should have that in mind even when the translated text is going to be shorter. So to avoid oversets or to make sure that even the shorter text is positioned in the right place, we need two things. We need white space so that there is space for a longer text, and we need a character that controls when the text should jump to another box. The character that I suggest you to use is that one that you see in this slide. It's called column break, and you place it by typing the function key and enter. in your keyboard. Um, you see, you see in this image what the column break does. The column break force your text to jump to another column. This might not be very interesting if your text is longer, because if your text is longer, InDesign is gonna use the white space that exceeds the text that you see there. But if you're going to translate to replace this text with Chinese, for example, that is shorter generally again, you'll find that you won't have to edit your text boxes because you have already placed that column break there, and so the text on the left column will be placed in the left column, and the text on the right column will be placed on the right column. This works also with different pages. So if you have a threaded text box that starts in a page and then it goes on the other page, you can place a column break at the end of the first page so that the text jump to the next page. And so by programming your layout in this way, you'll make sure that you won't need to edit any of the translated documents that you're going to produce. This is something that I suggest people who are using Redocon right now to start using, because when you've translated your documents and you use the revision feature, if your document was produced this way, it's gonna be instant the production of the updated documents, even faster than it is right now. So unlike segmentation, this practice is not mandatory, but it doesn't take much time to set it up, and it can save a lot of time and a few troubles. So I would suggest you to start using it. And you can also program your layout in an efficient way by using the horizontal scale. But that's something that I don't want to explain here because it's hard for me to explain it right now. And if you go to the link that you see in this slide, you'll find it explained there, and it's gonna make way more sense if you read it from there. So styles, you don't actually need to use styles to make your documents translation friendly, but they do help with making your workflow faster because you have more control over the text. They also help with building better translation memories. About this, I would suggest to use paragraph styles to create bulleted lists or numbered lists, because in that way, if you use InDesign correctly for making those lists, your translation memories would be cleaner, would be better. But right now, I wanted to talk to you a little bit more in depth about what happens when you apply an inline change of style to some text. In the screenshot that you see here, some of the text is highlighted in blue. You activate that functionality by clicking on the plus icon that you see next to basic paragraph, and that blue highlight indicates that text has an inline style. And well, why is it that important to you? Why should you know where there is inline style? Well, this slide explain that. It's interesting. It's interesting if you plan to add some automation to your process, if you already had some, or if you're using Redocon, because I think you remember when we talked about segmentation. So for translators, And for Redocument users, it's not so important what styles you apply to your text. And here you see that these groups, they have a different style. Each sentence has a different style, but the way that software understands that text and segment that text is the way you see under translation memories. So if you see you have different styles in the groups, but then in the translation memory, those sentences are saved in the same way. So the lesson here is that by making sure that the changes of styles in your documents are applied consistently and correctly, you also make sure that your translation memories are clean, and so that you can reuse those translations. And again, as we said today many times, if you reuse your translations, if you take advantage of the translation memories, your document production become faster, and also the quality of your documents improve. Let's not talk about the cost, because of course if you use translation memories, the costs are going to be lower. Before going to translation, make sure that the language of your document is correct and the document doesn't contain typos. It might sound pretty obvious, but sometimes it's not. InDesign helps you with that if you set the language attribute to the text. In the image that you see here, the selected text is in Latin, while I set the language variable, I set it to English. So you see that InDesign underline that text because it doesn't recognize it as English. So yeah, interesting for you is that this language attribute is used for spell check and hyphenation, and that helps a lot with typos. A very quick words about fonts. If you see in the font palette here, fonts are divided by groups. You have on top the Western European languages, then you have the Japanese, and then you have the Chinese, and so on. And you can use that palette to select the right font when the text that you place inside your document shows those pink squares that you see there. Those pink squares are used by InDesign to indicate you that the fonts that you're using doesn't have all the characters that you need, that the InDesign needs to display the language. So I guess what this lesson is more about. It's probably more interesting for people that are working on technical documents, like a user manual, for example. So I guess you've bought some devices in your life and they came with a user manual, and probably you notice that some of these user manuals are extremely hard to read. They come with instructions like the one that you see in the left part of this slide, and that information is really hard to assess for the user. While if you simplify your text, like the one in the right part of this slide, if you add a clear structure and you highlight the different different lists or actions or warnings and so on in different ways, you'll have two big advantages. First, the information is immediate to assess. It's very easy to read. Second, and this is why I'm talking about it right now, is that probably sentences like turn on the camera or press the icon and so on, they've probably been used already in some of the documents that you created before, and that means that you already have a translation memory for that somewhere. So by simplifying the text in your documents and giving it a better structure, you improve the communication with your clients, but also these small parts of text are less dependent on the context. So they are easier to translate. And as we said, you reuse more translations. So uh, um, all of that, all of this makes the entire process faster and smoother, and ultimately uh, it also makes it cheaper and increase the quality of all the documents that you produce because you retain the same terminology. Okay, images. This is probably the most important lesson you'll learn in this webinar today because images is what generally creates the more issues in a translation process. You shouldn't place text that needs to be translated inside images. It's fine, acceptable if you place some text that don't need to be translated, like measures or product names. But for everything else, you should extract the text from the image and either place it as a label in InDesign or make it a figure legend. So why is that? For many reasons, as you can see in this table. A translatable text makes an image unique to that language and likely to that document. So you'll find yourself having to deal with many images. Same goes for the people that will translate the document. They will have to deal with many more files and that will be time consuming and well, not very easy to manage. So it might happen that once the images are translated, you'll have to replace them here and there, and while doing so, you won't have a complete control over what is happening. But you won't be able to keep tab of what images you'd already replaced, and you'll have to double check that the document over and over. So the risk of making mistakes increases dramatically, and the production time also increases. These are two great examples of how you should work with images in InDesign. You either create a figure legend or you place legends above the image in InDesign, as we just said. You can then create a group with the image and the labels and anchor them to the text and so on. Okay, if you're looking to automate the translation process, there are tools that InDesign users sometimes use to speed up their job and avoid manual tasks or to have more control of what translators are doing. But definitely they're not the right tools because they lack fundamental features and because they're not made with the purpose of helping you translating your file. So most of the times these solutions are not reliable and they might create issues or introduce mistakes into your documents. So forget about InCopy. It's great if you use it for editorial changes when you need to translate something. The startup time is too much, and also you might forget to assign some text, and that will end up that not translated, and it's very messy to work with InCopy in a translation process. Some designers rely on scripts, but with scripts, again, they're not very powerful. They're not as powerful as they need to be for a task like this, and they lack of many features that you need while translating a document. Everything we've seen today will give a boost to your workflow and definitely will help you avoid dangerous mistakes. To some, it sounds trivial to create their documents properly, but I hope that with this webinar, you understood what dangers lie behind not doing so. Another great way to improve your workflow is to gain more control over the production of your documents by introducing a software into your process. And that is what we do at Redacon. So if you're interested in understanding how we can help you with the production and the updates of your documents, get in touch with me, and I'd be very happy to talk to you about Redocon and see how it can integrate into your process, either with in-house translators or with translation and vendors. Well, thank you very much for following this webinar. I hope it was a great experience for you, as it was for me. I hope it wasn't too boring, even though it was very long. And I also hope you learn a lot out of this. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email at stefano@redocon.com. If you're not already subscribed to our blog, to our blog newsletter, go to redocon.com/blog and subscribe from there. We will send you an InDesign tip every week. I forgot to mention that if you want to try Redocon, you can go to redocon.com. We offer a 14 days free trial. Thank you very much. This was Stefano Bernardi, and have a nice day.